topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February 2015. Thanks for tuning in this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. If we've not met before and you don't know me, I'm an organizational psychologist, workforce advisor, management consultant, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations by building a dynamic, high-performance culture, inspirational leadership, and nurturing managers activated by meaning and purpose. You can learn about what we do and how we can help you by visiting gusto-now.com or my personal site, elisecortez.com. With us today is Dr. Doug Brackmann. He is a psychologist at I Am Driven. He works with highly driven leaders and other highly driven people who often ADD and ADHD spectrum to help them stop their cycle of shame and self-sabotage so that they can achieve the success and happiness they were designed for. He's the co-author of Driven, Understanding and Harnessing the Genetic Gifts of Entrepreneurs, Navy SEALs, and Professional Athletes, and Maybe You, and a new book just coming out called Sheep and Wolves, Why a Small Percentage of the Neurodivergent Population May Be Responsible for All the Problems in the World, and the Solution. We'll be talking about the characteristics of this 10% of the population that are highly driven and how they can learn to be effective in life through the right structure and support systems. He joins us today from Nashville, Tennessee. Dr. Doug, a hearty welcome to Working on Purpose.
Thank you, Elise.
It's really great to know you. You probably changed my life, sir. So thanks a lot for that. I got so much insight reading your book. I went, oh my gosh, wow.
Yeah, that's my favorite Amazon review. It says a very uncomfortable autobiography. So it's kind of a little too close for home for a lot of people.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that offline, but wow. So big thank you. So it's really amazing to me that, you focus on only 10% of the population. Talk about a niche group. So let's talk a little bit about this specific group. Your 10% that you're talking about, this is the driven population. So how would you describe them and why do you want to work with them?
Well, I am a licensed psychologist in both IO psych and clinical psych. And so it's clinically speaking, it's called a whole bunch of different things, and so categorization is not really a big fan of that. And so it's a collection of neurodivergent and genetic divergence that really encapsulates, and I generously give it 10%, but it's really probably 3 or 4% to be, kind of square in the middle. Then you get the fringes, but it's if you got it, you got it. And if you know somebody who has it, it's really clear that we're different. And so it's, when I entered psychology and I went into grad school in 1991, and everybody gets into psychology to figure out their own crap. And I was headstrong into really understanding myself. I always knew I was different and tried to fit in, and that led to a whole bunch of issues. But in 1991, when they released this Time magazine article came out with we found the alcoholism gene, and that was the DRD2-A1 allele gene. And back
interesting.
36 years ago, 40 years ago, they really didn't understand genetics. And so it was the nature versus nurture controversy still existed. And in the last 10 years, particularly the last 5, epigenetically, the argument isn't nature versus nurture is gone. And so meaning that our genes interact with the environment and turn on and off. And so we being the Drivens are a collection of very different people, and we are primarily different in the way our brain works. And so the default modal network is this operating system, the brain. And so we have an operating system that literally is operating 3 times as fast, connecting 4 times as many brain parts simultaneously. So it's literally our brains are working differently. All the hardware is the same, but the software is running a very quick, fast, different program. So literally we see the world in a different way.
Mm-hmm. I appreciated how you'd also described this driven population that you talk about here, just so many different things about them. But some of this, of course, being that you're chronically discontented. I thought that was really interesting. I'm in this category to a certain extent too. I'm might be more on the periphery, not smack down the middle, but I could recognize it. A chronic dopamine deficiency that creates persistent discontent. All kinds of interesting things, high sensory and emotional intensity, fast pattern recognition, as you said, with poor impulse breaking. Interesting sort of collection of how to describe this group.
And the easiest way, or kind of the simplest way to describe it, is really the science behind it. You put us in a functional MRI, and the functional MRI is just this way of actually seeing in real time what's activated in the brain currently. Most people, 95% of people, when you put them in a functional MRI, they have a nice ball of activity in the left prefrontal lobe. It's the executive function. And what the executive function does for most people, it tunes out information. And so it allows them to selectively tune into information. And interestingly, it puts it in a series of sequential events. And so if you think about, the hunter-farmer theory, where most people over the last 5, 6, 7,000 years adapted to the agricultural revolution. And if you think about what it takes to survive as a farmer, it's farming. And so they're wired to put their finger in the ground, they put corn in it, and then they pat it, and then they water it, and then they patiently wait. And all of those attributes then, lead to their survival. But there's 5, 6, 7% of us that when you put us in a functional MRI, we don't have a ball of activity here. Really interestingly, the back of our heads light up, which is called the occipital lobe. And what that does is literally, it's where eyesight is. And so we use our eyesight to go through the world. A byproduct of that is we have something called hypofrontality, and this big collection of symptoms around ADD or ADHD, 2 very different things. But the similarity is this frontal lobe that is hypoactive, meaning that it's underactive in comparison to the people that have this big ball of energy. We have little dots of activity all over. The farmer sees the world as a series of sequential steps. We see the world as a big ball of potential activity all at the same time. Yeah. And we have a horrible sense of time. We are late to everything. We are constantly in this, world where we then, with all this activity going on, we can draw lines, unique combination of variables that other people can't see. And so, we tell our stories, or we try to explain our vision for the company, and, people look at us like we're crazy because we, are literally seeing connections between 18 different things, where the normal brain, is only seeing connections between 2 or 3. And so, it is truly a different world that we live in.
And it wasn't made for us. So I'll tell you, candidly, I took your assessment, and I came out. There's 10 attributes that, of course, are measured, and 8 of them I'm shown on the assessment is above average. And I thought, oh, okay, that's it's probably maybe it's not who knows? Maybe I was in a weird mood when I took the assessment. But then I read your book, Doug, I had somebody work with me years ago, and I told her how I like to finish my Saturday afternoon is my time to read my books for the podcast. And she goes, "Oh my gosh, you read books like I eat cookies." So your first book, Driven, is 350 pages. I easily just sat down and just devoured it in 4 hours, and wrote the notes and highlighted what I wanted to have for my notes. And I just couldn't put it down. I was like, oh my gosh. I was like it was every other page. I'm like, that's me. That explains me. And I can't tell you how, I don't know if I'm sobered by it or if I am scared. I don't know. But I just I'm amazed at the work that you're doing.
Oh, I appreciate that. And it's, for me, why I wrote Driven is I prior to writing it, so I wrote it, it published in 17 or 18 thereabouts.
17, yeah.
17. Prior to that, I was calling it the entrepreneurial mind. I was calling it all these different things, and I happened to actually be working in Navy Special Warfare, working in the PTSD world, and they're all driven too. And so it was this, and it is, we're drawn into this high risk, hyper, chaotic world. And that's where we thrive. And one of the early authors on this, Tom Hartman, was talking about how, you look at a pool of bacteria, 1,000 of the same bacteria, there's about 3, 4, 5% of that bacteria that's waiting for rapidly changing environments. And, the ice age hits, they're going to survive. And so that's us. When, the meteorite hits, or the next ice age, or, AI comes onto the scene, when chaos and all of that new activity, we just thrive in it. Mm-hmm. And so it makes sense, we're a bunch of animals, why we would be so resilient in the population. Why hasn't this been faded out? Because things change. And, and so it's a very relieving thing for a lot of people, because we structure our sense of self or our identity very differently. Mm-hmm. That's why when we go into a normal, a farmer's or a typical neurotypical psychologist's office, we can run circles around them, and we can finish their sentences. Mm-hmm. And they think we're crazy or sociopathic, or they don't know what they're looking at. And so the biggest difference, this left prefrontal is an identity machine. And if you think about, 10,000 years ago, there's mostly drivens running around on the planet, after this massive meteorite hit 14,000 years ago, we're figuring out survival. But as the agricultural revolution and population grew, and most people, as I always say, turned into butchers and bakers and candlestick makers. They had this nice channel of, this is how I survive. This is what I do. You want to take a driven person and make them crazy, is ask them to tell us who you are. It's like, what do you mean who? Like, because we don't have that consistent, experience through life with our thoughts. We're thinking all over the place. Mm-hmm. And, we tend to, and all of us need a sense of self. Most drivens tend to use their emotion as identity. Mm. And the genetics behind it, the dopamine receptors, number 2, which is boredom, the boredom gene. And, if you're a farmer, you need to tolerate boredom. You literally are wired to watch stuff grow. Yeah. As I always joke with all my drivens, I'm unemployable. I truly am. And most of my, guys are unemployable, so they have to start their own thing. But what boredom is very simply, it's a feeling that there's something missing or wrong.
Mm-hmm. I understand it well.
And, that when that gets folded into identity, there's something missing or wrong with me. Mm-hmm. And these are the addictive genetics, and anything that takes you out of that feeling that there's something missing or wrong with me, boom, you potentially become addicted. It also explains why we're so defensive. You want to drive a driven person crazy, is accuse them of being, something wrong with you, and no opportunity to explain themselves. We lose our minds. It's like, what do you mean? You don't understand. You don't understand. And that it's coming from this well of feeling like we don't fit in. And, the dopamine receptor number 4, a little bit more interesting. And that's the primary difference between ADD, which is, and ADHD. And the H is the hyperactivity or impulsivity, which I don't have a lot of. And so I really miss the ADHD diagnosis. But it is the grass is greener gene, or the FOMO gene, fear of missing out gene. As a hunter, I feel and I sense that there's more woolly mammoths, more opportunity over the next hill.
Right.
So I'm always chasing the shiny things in front of me. And it is, well, isn't that just ADD? Yes, but it is so much more than that. And if you get into driven, it really explains, why we're different, how we're different. But as I often say, it is a farmer's world. It is not our world. So we have to learn to fit in.
There's a reason I was talking to my daughter about your work, and she's always told me how silly I have been over the years. I just simply am not able to do a 9-to-5 job. I'm not able to go and work for somebody and be stapled into the chair. I mean, I'll work 12 hours, 16 hours a day, but just don't make me do it, on your terms with, my derriere stapled to the chair, in these hours kind of thing.
Yeah, we work well. We can work well with others. We do not work for others very well.
Yeah, it really
figuring out the faster, easier, softer, better way to do it. And why are you telling me to do your way when I can do it my way? And so the world, the world can be really tough for us though, because we don't fit in, and we often scare the crap out of people that aren't like us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I understand. Guilty as charged. On that note, since we're scaring the crap out of people, let's let them at least have a break while that's happening to them. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We're on the air with Dr. Doug Brackmann, a psychologist at I Am Driven. He works with highly driven leaders and other highly driven people, often ADD, ADHD spectrum, to help them stop their cycle of shame and self-sabotage so they can achieve the success and happiness they were designed for. We've been getting into what is driven. After the break, we're going to talk about the dark side of driven. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us, and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. If you are just joining us, my guest is Dr. Doug Brackmann, the author of Driven, Understanding and Harnessing the Genetic Gifts Shared by Entrepreneurs, Navy SEALs, Pro Athletes, and Maybe You, and also a forthcoming book coming out shortly called Sheep and Wolves, Why a Small Percentage of the Neurodivergent Population May be Responsible for All the Problems in the World and the Solution. So I do want to situate a little bit about just, before we get into the dark side of the driven, if you can speak a little bit to the possibility of being driven. What can we do being driven?
I do that in my book. I mean, Da Vinci and all of, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and all of the, the list of people that have been diagnosed with ADD or fit into the driven criteria. We are basically the ones that have shaped and moved the world. Mm-hmm. We really are. Yeah. And, it's in my next work that it is coming out literally this week, is we are also responsible for a lot of the problems in the world. And so we, and I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs over the last 30 years, and, the justification, rationalization of how our minds can justify just about anything, and typically, we are not very, we're really not risk averse. We like taking risk. And often that means breaking the rules. And so riding the edge of the rules, and we always get accused of being sociopathic, which very simply is, the social norms and the rules don't necessarily apply to me.
Mm-hmm.
Drivens, we tend to live by the spirit of the law rather than the letter of the law.
Mm.
And, we don't have that part of the brain that, will just follow the rules. And, you don't make it very far in life following the rules, and particularly as an entrepreneur creating companies. I mean, you have to see around the rules to really what is the bigger objective. But if that objective is to make money on a quarterly basis, we can create a pretty horrible system for a lot of people. I think that's coming to a head right now. So it's driven. I think there's a lot of responsibility that hopefully comes with it. If you're hearing this and you're driven, and it's a gift first, but it is a curse.
Yeah, I appreciate that full perspective. So that's the dark side, yes, but also too, I mean, it can be very destructive, self-destructive, self-sabotaging. You mentioned in your books.
Yeah, and that's what gets people into my office, and there's Carl Jung, big fan of Jung. He was driven, big fan, and what he always said was at men are either 16 or 45 when they enter his office. At 16, you're out to conquer the world. At 45, if you've conquered the world, you realize it isn't the world you needed to conquer, it's yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that, sabotage was my doctoral dissertation. And I looked at, why January sucks at the gym, and why is, who's really in charge of me.
Mm.
And, the difference between, the neocortex and actually the biology of the body. And so I get into that in Driven. I won't go into it here too deep, but it's a very interesting exploration that I believe Drivens eventually have to go on. Because if you don't go into this inner world of the Driven, if you stay in the outer world, it's pretty quickly deduced that, survival in this world is pretty damn easy. It really is. And so once you've reached that point of, my outer world looks great, but my inner world, this feeling that I'm not enough, this feeling of imposter syndrome,
Mm-hmm.
plagues Driven,
Mm-hmm.
and that is what we are, is, this feeling that I'm not enough. And that needs to be explored if you don't want that to steer your world.
Yeah, I was really intrigued. You talked about the identity issue in the last segment, but I was really intrigued that you talk about how, when ignoring the shadow doesn't make it disappear, and you says it gives it the steering wheel, which is fascinating. And so talking about how pain that isn't felt gets passed on. Families do this, cultures do this, etc. But you also say that we are the ones who carry generational pain until it becomes unbearable.
Yeah, and
this notion of doing this work is so important.
Yeah, that's really getting into the work I've been. My true passion is trauma healing, and that my doctoral chairperson, Jim Spira, and roommate at Berkeley was a guy named Peter Levine. So I entered Peter Levine's world back in the 90s, and it has shaped everything I do. He being driven too is but the influence of actually who's in charge of me. Is it, the monkey mind? Is it this problem solver that's up in my head, or is it my base biology that's in the body? Very simply, this is the brain. This whole thing that we're living in is the mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the felt sense that I'm not enough drives us to great success. But when the outer world is, going really well, and there's not a lot of chaos, we tend to come up with great ideas to bring chaos back into our world. And the sabotage stories that I have are just phenomenal, guys that blow up their worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And with the next great idea, or they have the typical big exit, they have a 7, 8 figure, 9 figure exit, and everything is great. And then all of a sudden, 3 years later, just like lottery winners, you blow up your world.
Mm-hmm.
So I dive deep into that with my guys about, how to actually stop the sabotaging cycle, which is trauma healing.
Fascinating stuff. By the way, now you can't get away from me, Doug, because this is fascinating work. I'm really, I'm in. So let's dive into your new book coming out here, Sheep and Wolves. Let's first start by what an intriguing title right there, Doug. But let's, for our listeners and viewers who haven't read the book yet, like I have, distinguish sheep and wolves first.
Yeah, and just calling most people sheep, and it's I've struggled with that forever. It is not meant to be a put down. Sheep are compliant. Sheep are not a problem to society. Sheep follow the rules. They're not stirring the pot. And the wolves, and typically big pharma, big food, all of these things that are being discovered now through both the internet, which is a phenomenal Gutenberg's printing press on steroids, I think I call it. It's a way of disseminating information that you can't you can't hide from your past anymore. And that is with Epstein files and everything else we're facing now, none of that is new. I mean, well, the world's terrible. No, the world's actually never been safer, ever, ever in the history that we can, recorded history. Well, how can you say that it's safe? Well, you look at our health, you look at the wars, you look at, the chances of me or you are dying in a starvation, or, God forbid it, you get an infection 150 years ago, you were dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so as the world has become this beautiful, safe place, the collective is freaking out. And, trauma comes up when the world becomes safe. So when the guys come back from Afghanistan is when they freak out. It's not when they're in combat. And all my, team guys and all the guys I've worked with that go back, they want to go back into the familiar world of chaos. And we're seeing it. We're literally witnessing it now as chaos is coming back into the world. And it's just, as a collective, I think we're, but you try to explain that to someone who has this very dominant left prefrontal that's seeing linear, that doesn't see the big picture. They think you're crazy. They think you're a conspiracy theorist or whatever, but it's like, no, don't you see it? And that's what, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, my own experience of why doesn't the rest of the class see how stupid this is? Like, this is, they're training us to be assembly line workers. This is not going to apply to me. But, if you are in the category of normal, this just looks like, what is happening for drivens, for all the ones like me and the ones like us. Don't you see how this and this could actually go together? This is catastrophe happening. And now with AI and the internet, you can see under the covers, what other drivens, they're running big food and big pharma and using quarterly quarterly justifications for profits, and we got to do it for no, you're hurting a lot of people. And, as me, compassionate, mostly on the trauma healing path person, it's like, what are we going to do? So it's really the drivens that are, both destroying the world. And I think we are the ones that can see it and make some changes. And so it's important time for drivens to get this message out and really start talking about what are we going to do.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, just starting to recognize that you are a driven. I mean, so that was incredibly, just recognizing for me that I'm somewhere on that spectrum really was, it helped me understand my life, my world, my choices so much better. And so that already is equipping me to create some of that necessary structure that, we rebel against. So that's part of it. So I think your work is really important, just starting with the idea of helping people to recognize if you're in this camp, if you're a wolf. So let's talk a little bit about this idea of burden and gifts. So first, we've talked a lot about the burdens, I guess. We see we care, we can sense and take in an awful lot. That's part of the burden. Any other burdens you want to surface before we talk about the gifts?
Well,
How long
it's
do we have? I
very
know.
Jungian in my interpretation of everything. So is it lead or is it gold? The answer is yes.
Yeah.
The alchemy model. But hypersensitivity. We are some really big-hearted, sensitive people.
Mhm.
And the RSD, or the reactive abandonment stuff that we get into, and this intense fear of rejection. This one of the primary differences between sheep and wolves is really the sheep are a herding animal, HERD. And what happens when a cheetah runs into a herd of gazelles? They scatter.
Right.
Everybody's on your own, and so you see that, and they're all scrambling into their own camps, and everybody's splitting up. Where wolves are a pack animal. What happens when a bear attacks one of the wolves in a wolf pack is all of the other wolves come. And that's what drivens are really craving, is somebody to have my back.
Mm.
One of the hardest groups I've done is when you have 7-man, Navy SEAL teams, and there's normally 8 and one's missing, man. Those groups, where they've lost somebody, are just, what drives Navy SEALs is love.
Mm.
And, what drives a true, and I work, I work with C-suites primarily. And, when you get the C-suite, and most are drivens, working as a true wolf pack, it is a cheat code. But if they're not working as a true wolf pack, it is a match made in hell. So is it a gift or is it a curse? It is both.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to learn to really step out of that experience and operationalize and create external to us what's missing internally. And that is structure and routine. And we have to create the executive function out of our heads.
Yeah, this works. This has always worked best for me when I have, people on my team that can kind of help provide that and really tell me what to do. I mean, I need you to do these 2 things by 9 o'clock. Oh, okay, I'll do that. It works. It really works.
And it is a farmer's world. It is their world. And, we, by default, are often put into positions of leadership because we see the big picture. And, if we can train ourselves to actually let go of control, most of us are pretty control freaky. It's just faster for me to do it myself. And that's not true.
No.
But clarification and teaching others how to really communicate with us and how to actually communicate with them in a way that is, you don't need to explain the entire big picture. You just need to explain the little piece that they're responsible for, task it to them, give them 2 weeks, and then they'll come back. And Elon, classic driven, he's a little bit more on others. He's more on the spectrum than some, but he comes in once a month, or, to each of his 4 primary platforms, looks at the big problem, gives the solution, and then gets out of the way and lets them work and comes back in 3 weeks. And so that capacity to let go of control is something that drivens have to learn. That doesn't come naturally to us.
Mm-hmm.
So the meditation and all of the deeper work comes in. And so it's, and religion is something that most of us have struggled with as drivens, because we really do have a strong distaste for hypocrisy. And so, yes, they may be saying they're this and that and this, but we see right through them. And it's like, yeah, but don't you see what a piece of crap you really are? No, they don't. Where, spirituality is something that, I always joke about that. It's not actually a joke, but, religion is for people that are scared of going to hell. Spirituality is for people that have been to hell. And most drivens have been to hell. And so it's self-created. And, that the capacity to actually own your world and take responsibility as a driven for your own world and really embrace the spiritual path is that's where we turn into potentially superheroes.
Oh, hang on to that thought. I want to dive more into that, but let's grab our last break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We're on the air with Dr. Doug Brackmann. He's a psychologist at I Am Driven. He works with highly driven leaders and other highly driven people, often ADD and ADHD spectrum, to help them stop their cycle of shame and self-sabotage so they can achieve the success and happiness they were designed for. You've been noticing we've been talking a lot about both the gifts and the burdens of the driven. After the break, we are going to go a little bit deeper into this world, talk about the responsibility of the driven and becoming carriers of healing. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Dr. Doug Brackmann, the author of Driven, Understanding and Harnessing the Genetic Gifts Shared by Entrepreneurs, Navy SEALs, Pro Athletes, and Maybe You, and also his latest one just coming out now, Sheep and Wolves, Why a Small Percentage of the Neurodivergent Population May Be Responsible for All the Problems in the World and the Solution. Okay, so that was really intriguing what you just teased us with on just before the break, this idea of religion versus spirituality. It makes complete sense to me. I've never been drawn to religion. I've been exposed to several, but never been drawn. None of them make any sense to me in terms of hanging on to that as the thing for me. But spirituality, yes. I think also the idea that we've gone to hell, and that makes a lot of sense to me as well. So very, very interesting insights here that you're just dazzling me with. You mentioned also the responsibility of the driven, and I really thought this is important to talk about. You say in this latest book that if you are driven, you will influence others. It's not a choice. So your intensity, perception, energy all shape the nervous systems around you. So let's talk a bit about the responsibility of the driven.
Well, it in my work with all the Navy SEALs, and we are good people, in that for the most part, and the rationalization, justification, what gets in the way is the trauma, and trauma is well, I don't have trauma. Everybody has trauma. That's semantically, I don't want to get into big trauma, capital T versus low T, whatever, but it is what shapes the way we steer our ship. It is this unconscious. It's unconscious is not a mystery. It's right below your nose. It's all recorded in the body, and as you are, you're not responsible for what happened to you, but you're responsible for the healing. You're responsible for what happens. And I've worked with some pretty outrageous people that have, making lots of money, back in the wild west of the early internet. These guys were making money hand over fist, selling all kinds of stuff to grandma that grandma didn't need, and, and getting their credit cards, and, they're not really hurting anybody. But they knew it was wrong, and that justification, rationalization, and it's because largely, the heart is a trauma. It's an organ. It's a thinking machine, and lots of new research coming out about that. The gut and the heart are both thinking machines. But when you have a frozen heart or a dorsally frozen heart, you're unaware of your impact on others, so to speak. But you know it on your knower, and that fear of actually going on the inside and really taking responsibility for healing yourself. And I say it in my new book very directly. It is not a choice if you're driven. It's just a matter of time before you get to a place where, your world is falling apart and you can blame no one else. And one of the biggest differences between what makes me crazy about most of the world is this thing called locus of control. And locus of control is the world happening to me or the world happening for me. And this is it my fault or is it your fault? And herding animals or, farmers tend to actually have external locus of control. They really, like to explain how the weather was bad and this with that, and that's why the crops failed. We did everything we did last year just the same, and it just happened. And so we're going to keep doing what we did again and again and again because it works. And that model for the left prefrontal, that executive function, tends to actually validate, it's not my fault. I get to blame them or blame them and blame them and blame them. But if you're a hunter like me and you're after a rabbit, there's no excuse why that rabbit got away except for me. And so drivens tend to have incredibly high locus of control. And we actually think everything is our fault. And so we became this, I could have called it the shame-based identity. Probably wouldn't have sold very many, but it is that, feeling that, it's all my fault and I'm the biggest piece of crap in the world. And, and these are the addictive genetics. So it is, the wonderful thing about locus of control is it's malleable, meaning that, it's something that you can adjust appropriately because everything is both external and internal variables. And just the curiosity around that sets the driven free. It's much more difficult, and I don't work with non-drivens. I tend to struggle in that world because I have a very difficult time with people that don't take high personal responsibility for their lives.
Understand. And speaking of that, part of what also drew me about what you're doing too is you have a whole section on becoming carriers of healing in this new book that you're putting out. And you talk about it. You say you don't heal others by teaching them. You heal them by being regulated in your own body, feeling your own pain instead of exporting it, slowing down instead of overriding. So all this is really interesting to me, at a time when, technology and AI is surfacing so much in terms of who we are as humans, where we're distinct, et cetera. So I think this notion of becoming carriers of healing is really compelling and hard work.
And really hard work. And it did. Classic example is the founder, the founders, visionaries, or whatever you want to call them, the startup guy who, gets the company going, and we're wired for that world because you're in survival mode. The company might go away and but once you have a real company and it's running and you're no longer in survival mode, they kick us out. They do, because we can't run at that speed anymore. And so that fragility of what world we're in. But when I get my drivens to, with work, with trauma healing, breath work, meditation, and all of the amazing stuff that's happening in the trauma healing world, come out of survival mode, we come into companies and see things that we can create environments that are absolutely magic to work in. Magic to work in. But you got to do the work first. otherwise it's, as Peter Levine always said, trauma is like tuberculosis. It just wants to spread. Hurt people. Yep. Healed people also heal people. And so healing is also just as infectious. And, the guys that I have worked with for years that are in these, companies that they run, people love them because it's a wolf pack.
I got it. Well, we're coming closer to the end of the show, and I don't want to leave people without some hope here, some possibility here. Besides, calling you and working with you, you say that the first step in taking charge of your genetics is building the right environment for your personality, giving you the structure that you need. And I really could relate to that. Boy, I could relate to that. So if you could talk a bit more about, helping giving them some reins to be able to take a good, healthy control over their lives?
It is immediately what comes to mind is good enough is not a feeling. And for drivens, if you're hearing this, that is like, that can be profound. Because nothing will ever feel good enough to a driven. And that's the joke about my doctoral dissertation. It never felt good enough. And when Dr. Spira shook my hand, congratulations, Dr. Doug, first guy who ever called me doctor, my inner experience was, and my monkey mind said, ha, he bought it. The joke is it was good enough. It's on the wall. It was a check mark. And so learning how to actually not use our emotion to steer the world is the primary thing I got to hear as you're driven. Then you got to create, an external way of validating what is good enough. Finance, romance, and health. Very simply, it's my finances is good enough, which means I'm not struggling with paying my mortgage and my basic needs are met. And that's a factual external thing. How you feel about it can then be separate. And health, I never felt like I was healthy enough and wound up doing 11 years of Ironman triathlons, beat the crap out of my body. And it is, but it's a magic 2 seconds when you cross the finish line of an Ironman, and then you turn around and look at the time, and then all of a sudden, wasn't good. And so that capacity to separate that is the real message for if you want to start this driven healing process, is create reality checks. My exercise is good enough, my health is good enough, and can always be better. And my finances are good enough and can be better. I'm not trying to get rid of this internal feeling that, it's not enough. And I think, big food, big pharma need to actually create that as a model rather than more is better. It's not. More money is not better.
2 more questions here. So briefly, how do you help support people? I know I've looked at your LinkedIn profile on your website. You've various ways you can work with people, but for listeners and viewers who don't know, how do you help support people on their journey?
I'm a clinician. I'm one-on-one that's where my magic is. Obviously you can't scale that. And I've had multiple attempts to scale, I call it scale porn, that everybody's got to scale. No, you don't. You don't. But group dynamics, and we heal in groups, and driven men run men's groups, and I love it. Absolutely love that. One of my favorite things to do is I'm a meditation teacher, been teaching meditation for 20 years, and I teach meditation at gunpoint. And working with Randy Kelly, we came up with a way of actually very simply to understand meditation at gunpoint is I integrated long range shooting. We shoot out to a mile, 1,780 yards with very big guns. And there is no recoil in the present. And so if you're anticipating recoil and you're scared, you're not present. And so learning how to actually disinhibit the body and soften into one of my favorite names for God. There's 43 names for God in the Bible. One of them is presence, divine presence, and being able to really harness that gift of presence and disinhibiting the body is the core beginning place where trauma healing is. And then, you can actually touch your potential. And that's the greatest fear of every driven, is really, really embracing what we can do with this way we're wired. It makes most of my guys cry. And women. And I'll say it, as a driven woman to you, every single time I've done this, I've had brand new shooters brand new women who've never shot a gun outshoot 25-year Navy SEAL veteran snipers.
I read that in your book. I thought that was amazing.
Driven women are, and I often joke, if I can get 1,000 of you guys together all healed up, you guys will run the world. I mean, please.
Sounds good to me.
Please take it.
So we have gotten to the end here already, Doug. It is such an honor and just amazing to get to learn from you, to read your books, to have gone through your assessment, and have you on the air and sharing with my listeners around the globe. Thank you so much for coming and working on purpose.
I had a blast. Yeah. You're welcome. Very welcome. Anytime. Let's do it again.
Absolutely. You can run, but you can't hide from me now. All right, listeners and viewers, you are going to want to learn more about Dr. Doug Brackmann, the work he does with Highly Driven, and his books, Driven and Sheep and Wolves. You can start by visiting his website. It's very simple. It is imdriven.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via your recorded podcast. We were on air with Yadira Caro, the author of Hardcore Soft Skills, A Guide to Work with Humans. We talked about how and why learning what have been called soft skills make such a difference in motivating and engaging teams, and dove into some of the several core soft skills she teaches. See you next week for another nourishing conversation to create destination workplaces where people actually want to come to work and give their best. Let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.